Hello, welcome. We are now in the second lecture of the 28th module. This module is European Literature of the 20th Century. The second lecture is on German literature of the 20th century. You might already know that it was in the 20th century that Expressionism came into being in Germany. German drama and film were deeply influenced by Expressionism. Georg Kaiser was an important expressionistic playwright. In film, German film, we have a lot of German expressionist movies, such as The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu, Metropolis, etc. These are classics. In Switzerland, at the same time, had developed Dadaism under the influence of Tristan Tzara. Switzerland and Germany are neighbors and deeply influential on each other. So Dadaism also influenced German writers at this time. Surrealism, Expressionism, Dadaism, these are all avant-garde movements that give terrifying pictures of war, of urban life, of the meaninglessness of urban life, of political oppression and illness, etc. These abound in German literature of the 20th century also. An important poet of this time is Rainer Maria Rilke. He is well read even today, and Rilke's The Book of Hours is very famous. Duino Elegies is an important part of his oeuvre as well. D-U-I-N-O, Duino Elegies. In fiction, a very important name is that of Thomas Mann. Nobel laureate Thomas Mann developed a unique style of writing which blended realism and modernism. Thomas Mann lived from 1875 to 1955, and Mann was one of the members of the group called Exile Literature. Exile Literature was a group of anti-Nazi writers of this time. Thomas Mann's important works include Buddenbrooks. It is his first major work. It's a massive work. And it is here in this novel that Thomas Mann introduced the concept of leitmotif. Leitmotif is a recurring image or symbol or idea in a text that becomes the main theme of the text. Buddenbrooks is the epic saga of a family, and it introduces the concept of leitmotif. Another important novel is a very small novel, that is Death in Venice. It is a story of a writer, Aschenbach. He has lived a very disciplined life, and after many years he takes a vacation and goes to Venice. Here he undergoes a transformation. He gets homosexual desire for a boy called Tadzio, and this was the time when cholera is breaking out in Venice, and Aschenbach dies of cholera. Before he dies of cholera, he gets a hallucination which is like the heightening of his creative abilities, and this is a typical novel of Thomas Mann depicting the artist and his psychological transformations in an indifferent world. Similarly, Magic Mountain, which is another major work by Mann, is also about a man who undergoes a transformation. Hans Castorp is the protagonist. He's an ordinary engineer. He is about to join a job, and he goes to the Alps mountains, to meet his cousin Joachim, who is undergoing treatment there in a sanatorium. And when he reaches the Alps, Hans Castorp cannot leave the sanatorium or that mountain, and he stays there long after Joachim also leaves the place. He stays there for 7 years, and finally at the end of the novel we find him joining the First World War, which means he will die. But before that he also gets a hallucination, and he goes to the Alps to ski in the Alps, and there he sees hallucination of two. At first he sees people living in a paradismal harmony, everybody living in harmony, and then he sees the hallucination of two old women tearing apart a child and eating it. This is representative of the modernity. It is representative of war. It is representative of this world where God has died. God is dead. Another important novel by Thomas Mann is Dr. Faustus. Faustus, that is how the Germans pronounce it. Not that my pronunciation of all the other titles was right, but still. Dr. Faustus is the story of a music composer who, he's actually a great composer, but he wants to compose the greatest ever composition, for which he deliberately contracts syphilis and goes mad, and in his madness, he makes his greatest creation and dies. Another novel is The Confessions of Felix Krull. In The Confessions of Felix Krull, you have the protagonist Felix Krull, who has turned lying and deception into an art. These are all novels that show various facets of the corruption in modern society, the decadence in modern society, the loss of values in modern society, and how the artist is trapped in such a society. Thomas Mann is an author that you must read. Not easy. Don't think it is easy to read Thomas Mann. Very difficult, but it is worth it. The next important writer is Hermann Hesse. You must all know that he wrote the famous book Siddhartha. And he was from a theological background, and he wrote a lot about spirituality and religion. His famous work Siddhartha was dedicated, because it has an Indian theme and context, it was dedicated to Romain Rolland and Wilhelm Gundert. Wilhelm Gundert. And what is the first name of Gundert? Wilhelm, right? Please look it up. I might be wrong. As I spoke, I get a feeling that something is wrong. Anyway, Siddhartha is a story of a boy who lives during the time of Gautama Buddha. He is not Siddhartha. The Gautama Buddha's name is also Siddhartha, but the protagonist is another boy. Here, Gautama Buddha appears as Gautama. So it is about another boy who lives at that time. Very small book. You can read it if you want. Another very important book by Hermann Hesse is Steppenwolf. It is about a man with a split personality. He is torn between his love for humanity and his wolf-like aggression and homelessness. It is about the two sides of man, as you can see from the war itself, wolf-like aggression. And these are all people who were deeply influenced by the First and Second World Wars. And then we have another important novel, which is very complicated and spiritual, The Glass Bead Game. It is a Bildungsroman. If you remember, Bildungsroman is a German genre and a German term itself. The next important writer is perhaps the most important writer, Franz Kafka. He was a major writer of the existentialist movement, and Kafka was a Jewish writer. He had a very oppressive, domineering father, and this father has appeared in Kafka's novels later as the oppressive authority or the bureaucracy. And Kafka was trained as a lawyer, and he worked in an insurance company, and his personal experience with bureaucracy also led him to write about the unending complexities of bureaucracy and the oppression involved in the bureaucratic setup. Kafka lived from 1883 to 1924. That was a short life. He wrote a number of novels, but burned 90% of his work. Also short stories he wrote. He never published any book in his lifetime and left all his novels unfinished. This is the man who is one of the greatest novelists of world literature. Just imagine. His novels were all published by his friend, Max Brod. You must know that among his many short stories, very famous is The Metamorphosis. The Metamorphosis is the story of Gregor Samsa, a traveling salesman, an ordinary man like Berenger in Ionesco, an ordinary man who one day gets up from sleep to find that he has turned into a roach or an ungeziefer or a very contemptible insect. This is a metaphor for how we will all turn useless one day. We will all become, outcasts one day. The world may not need us all the time. So Gregor Samsa realizes that even his family doesn't want him. And at the end of the story, he just crawls under the bed and decides to die and dies very unceremoniously. It is about the absurdity of the human condition. So are his other novels, The Trial, The Castle, etc. The Trial is about Joseph K. He is a very ambitious chief financial officer in a bank. He is living in the middle of, we don't see him live like that, but we are made to believe that he is living in the thick of, middle class life. When he turns 30, one day, on his birthday, I think, on his birthday, suddenly he is arrested. But he is not taken away anywhere. He is asked to go to a court and report and attend the trial, etc. He is completely confused. He doesn't know what he did, what is his crime. And he tries to get out of it. Throughout the novel, he desperately tries to escape from it. And finally, on his 31st birthday, he is killed. And when two men bring him out of his house and push him against a rock and turn the knife inside him, he says, like a dog. He says the last words, like a dog, and dies. We are all like that, like a dog. Very insignificant sometimes human beings are, most of the time in fact. The Castle is about a man, K, his name is, and he comes to the village called West, and he says, I've got a job in the castle, I have to enter the castle. How will I enter? Who will I contact? Everybody is shocked. Nobody enters the castle. Nobody goes into the castle. The castle is like, where ordinary people cannot enter. In all societies, there are castles like that. This castle is a metaphor. For example, the academy. We are all ordinary people trying to pass NET and become professors. Everybody cannot easily enter the academy like that. Like that K cannot enter. And he is determined. He tries in many, many ways. But finally, we don't even know what happens to him. Probably he doesn't enter. Probably he lives in that village itself, working there instead. It is a metaphor of the archetypal human condition. America is another novel by Kafka. It is also titled The Man Who Disappeared or something like that. And it is based on some experiences of Kafka's own relatives who had gone to America. Then the next writer I have to talk to you about is Bertolt Brecht. Against the Aristotelian dramatic theatre, you might know Brecht introduced what is called the epic theatre, where reality of plot, development of plot from beginning, middle, end, this is completely discarded. In the epic theatre of Brecht, which is also later called a dialectical theatre, what is important is ideas. Are you following? What is important in Brechtian theatre is ideas, discussion of ideas. We are not supposed to identify with the characters. We are not supposed to enjoy the plot. There is no plot. There is no characterization. There is what you call the alienation effect, or the Verfremdungs effect. Characters suddenly step out of their role and talk to us directly. Sometimes they put up placards. You see all the mechanisms on the stage, the ropes and the pulley and all the planks, etc., that are used on stage for characters to move up and down, etc., that is visible on stage. Like that, we are alienated from the stage. There is no verisimilitude or lifelike effect. Brecht revolutionized the stage with plays like Threepenny Opera. It is very important for us because it is based on our John Gay's Beggar's Opera. Brecht also wrote Mother Courage and Her Children, which is set during the war. Mother Courage is exploiting the war and making money out of the war, but finally she loses her children to the war itself. There is also the Caucasian Chalk Circle, Life of Galileo, other very famous plays by Ibsen. One more writer I have to introduce to you is Günter Grass. He was a very philosophical writer who wrote political satires in a very experimental manner. He used metafiction and magic realism. He was not a very popular writer because he attacked the government and the bureaucracy. And his major Danzig trilogy, you might have heard of, it has the major novel, The Tin Drum. The Tin Drum has the protagonist Oscar Matzerath. Oscar is a dwarf. I told you this is a political satire. Oscar is a dwarf and he refuses to grow up. He remains small and he has the power to shatter glass with his voice. And he lives through the birth and death of the Nazi era. This novel is definitely a response to Nazi era. And the second novel of Danzig trilogy is Cat and Mouse. The protagonist Mahalke is the mouse and society is the cat that plays with the mouse. Another novel, the third, is Dog Years, Y-E-A-R-S, not this year, Y-E-A-R-S. And Dog Years is the story of two friends. These are all criticism of the society at that time. Local Anesthetic is a book that I have in my library also. It is another novel by Günter Grass. And Günter Grass has written a very controversial poem called What Must Be Said. For this he was very unpopular among the establishment and the government, etc. So this is in a nutshell, very briefly, about the German writers of the 20th century. German writers were brilliant and they wrote in a very different style and very difficult style also. You can't just read German literature for pleasure, but you should try to read. They are brilliant novels, very highly aesthetic novels, and I hope you will enjoy reading them and studying them. Please also read our reading material and also do the tests. So watch out for the third lecture of this module and happy studying. Thank you very much.